Crash course on the Vietnam War. Why did USA lose this war and retreat? The Vietnam War, also known as the Second Indochina War, was a conflict that lasted from 1955 to 1975. The war was fought between the Communist government of North Vietnam and the government of South Vietnam, which was backed by the United States and other anti-communist allies. The origins of the conflict can be traced back to the colonial era, when France ruled Indochina. In 1954, after years of fighting, the French were defeated by the Vietnamese Communists at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. The Geneva Accords were then signed, dividing Vietnam into two countries, North Vietnam, which was led by the Communist Ho Chi Minh, and South Vietnam, which was led by anti-communist Ngo Dinh Diem. The United States became involved in the conflict in the early 1960s, providing military aid and advisors to South Vietnam. The American involvement escalated with the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, which led to the passage of the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution authorizing U.S. military intervention in Vietnam. Despite their superior military technology and firepower, the United States and its allies were unable to defeat the communist forces in Vietnam. The war was marked by guerrilla warfare and a lack of clear objectives, leading to a stalemate that lasted for years. One of the key factors that contributed to the U.S. loss in the Vietnam War was the Vietnamese Communists' commitment to the cause. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army soldiers were willing to fight and die for their cause, which gave them an advantage in terms of motivation and morale. Another factor was the lack of support from the South Vietnamese population. The government of South Vietnam was corrupt and unpopular, and many civilians in the country either supported the communists or were ambivalent towards the conflict. This made it difficult for the U.S. and its allies to win the hearts and minds of the Vietnamese people. The United States also faced challenges on the home front. The war was deeply unpopular among the American public, leading to protests and demonstrations against the conflict. The anti-war movement gained strength in the late 1960s and early 1970s, putting pressure on the U.S. government to end the conflict. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, officially ending U.S. involvement in the war. The North Vietnamese Army then launched a major offensive in 1975, capturing Saigon and reunifying Vietnam under communist rule. The Vietnam War was a costly and divisive conflict that left deep scars on both the United States and Vietnam. It is estimated that over 3 million Vietnamese and 58,000 Americans lost their lives in the conflict. Some interesting stories or examples related to the Vietnam War include the use of Agent Orange, a toxic herbicide that was sprayed by U.S. forces to clear vegetation and expose enemy positions. The chemical caused serious health problems for many Vietnamese civilians and American veterans, and its effects continue to be felt today. The Tet Offensive, a major military campaign launched by the Viet Cong in 1968. The offensive caught the U.S. and its allies off guard and was a major turning point in the war. The My Lai Massacre, in which U.S. soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed Vietnamese civilians in 1968. The incident was a shocking example of the brutality of the war and sparked outrage around the world. The anti-war movement, which included protests, demonstrations, and acts of civil disobedience. Some of the most famous anti-war activists of the era included Martin Luther King Jr., Muhammad Ali, and Jane Fonda. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, a network of supply routes used by the North Vietnamese Army to transport troops and supplies to the south. The trail was heavily bombed by the U.S. Air Force, but was eventually rebuilt and proved to be a key factor in the North Vietnamese victory. The role of the media in shaping public opinion about the war. The conflict was the first to be extensively covered by television news, which brought the reality of the war into American living rooms. The images of wounded and dead soldiers, as well as the suffering of civilians, had a powerful impact on public opinion. The role of technology in the war, including the use of helicopters for troop transport and medical evacuation, and the introduction of new weapons such as the M16 rifle and the Huey gunship. The legacy of the Vietnam War, including the impact it had on U.S. foreign policy and military strategy, as well as the ongoing psychological trauma experienced by veterans and civilians who were affected by the conflict. Here are top 10 facts about this war. 1. The Vietnam War was fought between the Communist government of North Vietnam and the government of South Vietnam, which was backed by the United States and its allies. 2. The conflict lasted from 1955 to 1975 and claimed the lives of over 58,000 American soldiers and over 1 million Vietnamese civilians and soldiers. 3. The war was fought as part of the larger Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, with the U.S. supporting South Vietnam in an effort to contain the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. 4. The war saw the widespread use of chemical agents such as Agent Orange and napalm, which had devastating effects on both the environment and the health of civilians and soldiers. 5. The Tet Offensive of 1968, in which the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong launched a surprise attack on multiple cities in South Vietnam, marked a turning point in the war and eroded public support for the conflict in the United States. 6. The My Lai Massacre, in which American soldiers killed over 500 unarmed Vietnamese civilians, was one of the most notorious incidents of the war and further damaged the U.S. reputation both at home and abroad. 7. The anti-war movement, led by college students and other activists, played a significant role in ending the war. Protests, sit-ins, and other forms of civil disobedience drew attention to the human cost of the conflict and put pressure on the government to withdraw American troops. 8. The Vietnam War also had a profound impact on Vietnamese society, leading to the displacement of millions of people, the destruction of villages and infrastructure, and long-lasting psychological trauma. 9. The war officially ended on April 30, 1975, when North Vietnamese troops captured Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, and the last remaining American personnel were evacuated. 10. The legacy of the war continues to be felt today, both in the United States and Vietnam. It remains a subject of intense debate and reflection, with ongoing efforts to understand its causes, effects, and lessons for future generations. In conclusion, the Vietnam War was a complex and multifaceted conflict that had far-reaching consequences for both the United States and Vietnam. Despite their military might, the U.S. and its allies were unable to defeat the determined communist forces in Vietnam, and the war ultimately ended in a costly and divisive stalemate. The lessons of the conflict continue to be studied and debated by historians and policymakers today, as they seek to understand the challenges of modern warfare and the limits of military power. Here is a poem on the Vietnam War. The battle raged in Vietnam's fields, where men fought and died for what they believed. A war that tore a nation apart, that left so many with a broken heart. The soldiers marched on foreign soil. Amidst the heat, the sweat, the toil, the enemy was hidden in the trees, and death was a constant breeze. The bombs rained down from the sky, as mothers wept and children cried. The jungle echoed with the sound of war, a symphony of chaos that no one could ignore. The men who fought were brave and true. Their sacrifice was for me and you. They battled on with all their might, until the end was finally in sight. And though the war was finally done, the scars and pain were not yet gone. The memories of those who fell are etched forever, a living hell. But now we honor those who fought, and thank them for the battles they wrought. The Vietnam War may be in the past, but its lessons will always last. *****. Start planning your next global adventure with ease and convenience with our Booking.com referral link. https://www.booking.com/index.html $aid = 7989335 as a great choice to plan your next trip. You can find and book flights, hotels, cars, and local attractions all in one place, and their price match guarantee ensures you're getting the best deal. Thank you for kind support our Anhub Metaverse channel, and please watch more interesting videos here.